I think for maturity, for me, that's been the big piece over the last 2 to 3 years is understanding, hey, these areas I'm weak in, but somebody else is stronger. I know it needs a system, so let's get a system put in place, and then I can play within the rules.
Welcome to The Deep Dark, a business podcast where we ask seasoned minds to excavate their history, pulling out the best insights, the hardest moments, and yes, golden epiphanies. Somewhere in the stories and laughs, we all get a little smarter and feel a little better about our own business ventures. Remember, if it didn't hurt, it doesn't count. Your hosts are Chris Lyon and Tim Douglas at the Fidelis Creative Agency. So strap in and get ready as we plunge once again into The Deep Dark.
Today's episode is with Derek Ratliff, the owner of Horizon Firearms. He builds precision custom rifles for people who really don't suck. This episode was truly an awesome podcast. This was a great podcast with a truly sharp business owner. He is building a product made right here in Texas, USA. The world is a better place with Derek in it and what he is doing. So hey, listen up. Derek really rocked it. Have fun with it. Hope you learned something.
When we started that company, my brother and I, in a garage here in Welborn, right? And we sat down and said, I want to make product. This is what I was tired of in the archery space. I wanted to make product that in 12 months somebody wasn't going to throw it away as used product, right? Or like, oh, that's old technology, let's get something else. Mm-hmm. I wanted something that when you had one of our rifles that you knew that your grandkid could pick that up and 50 years or whatever.
That's kind.
Yeah, and you're like, that's, how I remember that. And so that's how we got started. Now, we've really started to do what we call our Venatic series. So Venatic is a word that means all things that pertain to hunting. So if somebody calls you a Venatic, that's a good thing.
Okay.
But we started to do kind of a mainstream line of rifles, which we call them core. So still custom at the core. Same great components, but don't have quite the attention to detail in terms of bedding, and like our custom rifles, we shoot them out to 1,000 yards and group them in speeds. But a rifle that somebody could have a Horizon, but not have to go through the expense or the process of doing a select. And so, kind of merging out of that company to do the core rifle series, right? That's why one of the main reasons we just started doing that. We kind of set on a quest where we wanted to control our own destiny. And so really in 2015, we started manufacturing carbon fiber composite stocks. And so I can say, like, we build stocks for Kimber and some other OEMs. I can't say, but we do stocks and custom design.
That's great.
Accessories for, some AR companies and stuff in the carbon space. We kind of added that to the fold. And then, kind of coming out of the COVID, this would be about a year or so ago, we acquired Stiller receivers, so Stiller Actions. They were out of Garland. They were the first bolt action clone receiver manufacturer. They're based here in Texas. And it was an acquisition that was somewhat, I don't want to say emotional, but sentimental to me, in the sense that they actually sponsored the TV show. They were the first sponsor that sponsored the TV show that my wife and I knew the original owner, and he had sold it, and the group that bought it in between, to be honest, didn't do very well with it. And so we kind of bought it out of distress to sort of revitalize that.
Why do you think they weren't doing well?
And it's interesting. And this is kind of a hard thing. In a small industry like the outdoor space, we always laugh. I work with the same 30 people. They just work at different companies. Treating your customers right and the attitude at which you approach the customers is very, very important. So I would say that they went from a very much startup, everybody knew the original owner, to this new owner, and this new owner kind of outsourced his sales and then really put all sales on one individual who, honestly, it really, really hurt it. And, I'm pretty easy to get along with guy, but, I remember that sales guy called one of our buyers and was like, hey, this is the change, you're paying this stuff up front, this is how our business is going to work, and that's just how it is, you're not doing business with us. And I'm like, I don't think you understand, like, we've been working with Stiller for years and years and years, and that's not how this industry works. And called the owner, and I'm like, look, here's the deal, either that guy never calls us or we never do business with you. Wow. And it's just that space works like that. I think a lot of people got taken up by that and the archery space was always the innovative space, right? So every year stuff was coming out.
Still is pretty innovative.
And the gun space was always behind. meaning like it was a slower curve. Now, I would say in the last 5 years, that curve went pretty steep.
Yeah, I saw it accelerate. I went on a tour, and I was up in Whitefish, Montana.
Oh, I love whitefish.
Oh, I
I've hunted
know.
in whitefish so much. I love it up there.
Man, if I would have known whitefish existed when I was young, I would not be
Yep.
here today. But
Except it is very cold in the winter.
well, it is, but I can handle that a little bit better than I can South Texas at 30 degrees with a 70-mile-an-hour wind and 100% humidity. But but I went up there and I went on. Man, this probably was like 2017-ish or so. But I went on the tour of Proof Barrels.
Oh, yeah. I know those guys really well.
And I went into Proof, and I started looking around, Two Bears and that whole thing
Yep.
that they have going up there. And I went around, and I started looking around, and I was like, now this is innovative. This is the first real innovative thing. I mean, fluted barrels had come along. Some other things had come along, but I was like, look at these carbon. And then, of course, they were making them for some military-grade weapons. And as I was looking at it, I was like, you mean this thing doesn't get hot? I don't have to change this out as fast as I'd have to change out. I mean, to me, that innovation had finally hit, right?
Yep.
Now, you can tell I'm old school.
No,
but I was like, wow, they were some of the first where I really started to notice.
And really, I mean, that was, to me, it was almost like triggering because, like, we had saw in archery, if you put carbon on anything, it sold, right? And that was really, in my opinion, technology aside, that was the first mark that said, hey, carbon is coming into the outdoors, into the hunting space. And then you saw carbon stocks and, stuff kind of we do. And, I mean, it's moving much faster. And so I think really they kind of got caught in that. So we acquired them. And then we also started, through COVID, at Texas Ammunition. And so we are now one of the top 5 distributors for Vista, so Federal, Hornady, Nosler, and Norma.
Where's that located in town?
So actually,
Is it next to the bow shop?
no,
Oh.
actually, so Texas Ammunition, we operate out of a facility we have in Idaho, which is really interesting. But that's,
Well, I noticed there was a new ammunition shop in town, so that's why I was,
So like I said, we did that as a protection, almost moat around Horizon. So we had ammo during the COVID period to test rifles,
Right.
And then really expanded that into our own private label line of ammunition.
So I'm gonna caveat here for a minute. So, I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, and I've worked with or helped entrepreneurs too. As we incubate and we help. So COVID comes along, right? And this is kind of that deep dark portion. So there's really 2 types of CEOs. First type of CEO, whenever something bad starts to come, whenever that storm is looming, which it seems like in the last 10 years, there's always a storm, right? But the CEO, in this case, the number 1 type, every time that starts to come, they dig a hole in the ground. And they bring all their people with them. They get in deep, and they look at it and they say, hey, we're just going to let this pass over our heads. This is just another storm. I've been here a million times. And then they get up and they survey the environment and they figure out what's going on. 9 times out of 10, they're going to sell for pennies on the dollar by the time that's finished. And then what happens is there's a second type of CEO, and this is a little bit different. And we'll use some hunting metaphor here, but as they see the storm coming, instead of digging a hole, they just point an azimuth. They get everybody on that compass. Hey, we're going to move this direction because we got to go somewhere. We can't go back, right? And so they get moving forward, and usually they're the ones that pick up those businesses penny on a dollar, right?
Right.
And that's I'm hearing that story coming here that you pointed an azimuth.
Yep.
You took that hunting that you'd been doing for so long, and you just took that to heart and started moving that direction.
And I think too, we really made a unique. We look at Casper Companies, and I'm not taking credit for this at all. This is more our CEO Jason Casper's visionary in this piece. Is we took advantage in the sense that we were able to actually sell range hand coming out of that, which at its peak, which is pretty nerve-wracking to take the largest part of an 8-company conglomerate, and but we saw some opportunities coming out of COVID and investments in different places. Time to kind of cash out and start building again, and so it's COVID was an interesting thing, especially when you looked at Casper Companies global-wise. The truck space couldn't get microchips, and so Ranch Hand was having its thing, and Bedrock, our truck-based company, still having really cabin chassis just now coming back, so that slowed down quite a bit. You had the gold and silver side exploding, so people
passed $2,000 an ounce today. Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
And so, yeah, we're actually building a 36,000 square foot depository for storage now because it's been so crazy.
Yeah.
And so then the firearms side, it was a really strange roller coaster. So we never actually shut down because we were, doing contracts and
Sure.
what do they call that? Not necessary, but whatever the
Yeah,
terminology
yeah. I
was.
remember non-essential.
Or essential.
Essential,
Sorry.
sorry.
I just
Yeah.
paused that.
You were
So we were essential. Yeah.
Right.
So the only thing that was weird, I remember one week everybody got COVID except for me, and so literally there was 2 week period where I'm like, man, I'm the only person coming in the office. Like this is the strangest thing.
Yeah.
And so that business, we kind of rode on the fringe of a market that was blowing up. So really, when we look at the bolt gun and hunting gun space, it's always sort of a steady eddy.
Right.
We don't take these big swings from political charges, or we don't take swings from things like COVID.
Mm-hmm.
We just sort of ride this really loose wave, which is a good safe spot in the firearm space. And typically, we actually see almost an opposite trend. So coming into a different environmental or a different political cycle, or the AR, whatever, modern sporting rifle space will go down, and ours will stay right there.
Oh, I've seen it. And I think, man, I can tell when they've got me, right? When the marketing's got me.
Yep.
Because there's been as a marketer, I can tell you when the marketing's got me. The other day, just an aside, that show that was on television, Terminal List, with Chris Pratt. And
Oh, yeah.
Man, I watched through it and I read the book. And all of a sudden, I find myself buying a new pair of sunglasses. And I couldn't figure out why I bought myself that pair of sunglasses. And then I'm looking at the picture, and I'm like, that's because he wore those pair of sunglasses all the way through. And I didn't even think that they got me in that commercial that was on television.
Nope.
But anyway, it's all good. They got me. But to tell you what I was going to is there's been this full move to kind of nostalgic firearms, right? The
Absolutely.
lever action came back.
Oh, yeah.
The bolt action came back.
Yep.
Bolt actions that kind of look like they're on an AR framework, but are truly bolt actions.
It's funny
at all.
you say that. So on the custom side. So again, we do selects, we do kind of a run, and then we have what we call them sprint series. So we may run a specially serialized, 1 to 15, 1 to 20, and so we did kind of a tour around our dealers to see what's new, what's hot, what's the people asking for.
Right.
And you're exactly right. And I don't think we're quite there yet. But what's happening is people, I'm going to say younger than me, have a memory of what their dad or granddad was using. So it's a CDL Remington, a Woodstock with a blue barrel. It's a Browning Medallion gold medal, right?
Absolutely.
And so, or white medallion. And so what's happening is now you've got this young generation going, man, I want a gun that's like my grandparents or like my granddad.
Right.
And so you're starting to see companies lean back that way.
And they can't pick up the Remington 700 anymore.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, well, now some of the too sporty stuff feels not authentic, right? Because you've been inundated with the amount of modern sporting rifles. Like, I don't want something that's in that category. I want something in this category. And so you mentioned proof. We're actually seeing on our customs a trend where I'm doing more wood stocks, and we have a really unique way how we do wood stocks. We take like you talk about South Texas Ranch, you could bring us a block of wood from Corpus. We're going to stabilize it, resin cast it, and create a stock made out of a family heirloom piece. But most of those wood stocks are coupled with we flute carbon fiber. So we do fluted carbon fiber proof barrels. And you're seeing a guy who's like, ooh, I want the modern barrel, but I want the old school.
Yes.
And so it's neat to see that swing.
By the way, that's going to last for more than 5 generations, right?
Yep.
And it's going to be spot on every single time.
Yep.
And it's just,
And so, it's funny that you notice that because I've been
Yeah.
really keeping my finger on watching that trend.
I'm a marketer, man. I see what they're doing in my head, right? I can, if in this focus on deep dark, I can tell you that marketing techniques do work, right? It will influence you, and that's one of our big things that we're doing is we try to do no harm, right? Ever, because in a way you can really influence somebody the wrong direction. But in this case, I see what they're doing to me, and it's all right.
You're talking about marketing. That's the hardest, the most interesting thing. So like as we've companies grown and moved and stuff, and I've sort of moved into a marketing or call it a founder role where it's really new product development and customer management or marketing type stuff. And what's hard is we really kind of started the business as authentic, and we want to continue to be authentic. And so, it's like, and with the firearm space, we can't really do Facebook ads and promotions and those kind of things.
No,
right?
you
So
can't.
in the industry is so small that if you're not honest or you're not genuine, people see right through it, then you're done. And so, for us, I think we talking about this, like podcasts or being subject matter experts and, trying to really focus on the sport. And it's not about my products, but like my products, we always say a custom gun, you shouldn't have to market that it's accurate, right? That's right. You should know that, right? And so what we're really marketing to is sort of how does my product give you an experience, and how do I, genuinely I'm going to go on that experience with you, or not try and say, hey, take mine and do this, but it's like you want to increase that satisfaction level, and so it's a hard thing to do.
Absolutely, it's a hard thing to do. As we're talking about this, and I want to get more of some questions, but this is great. But who did a really good job of that lately? Yeah, was Rigby.
Oh yeah.
Rigby did a fantastic job when they went back to their old Africa hunts, and they started to do the nostalgic piece in there. I think there's something that people are really grabbing onto about, especially COVID, post-COVID, about re-engaging with nature and having that moment and not just harvesting, actually doing something that's hard.
Not only that, but it's so we're talking about Casper Company. Don Casper was like the matriarch, or patriarch, of the whole deal. He was class of 49 here at A&M, and for a long time we lived in Shiner. He was in the office next to me, right? And he'd come by and really was a grandfather figure for me, and taught me a ton on the business side. And I remember we were doing an office upgrade, right? So we had like wall paneling, and we were painting the paneling and doing new floors and all kinds of stuff. And he came in, he sat down in my office, and I could see he was kind of puzzled a little bit. And I said, Mr. Don, what's wrong? He said, let me tell you something. He said, that's real wood paneling. Don't get caught up in all these trends, because what I've seen in my entire life, they'll turn around, they'll come right back. And I was like, oh, it's so true when you see like the 90s clothing style and the guns and stuff coming back. And so, my whole leaving from that point, I've always been like, okay, well then what's the next cycle, right?
That's right.
I think that's an interesting way to look at it.
Absolutely, and I think that y'all are right on the money. So, in building this business, what has been the toughest thing you've had to do? What keeps you up at night?
A lot of things keep me up at night.
Other than payroll. No, we can talk about payroll.
So two things. People always ask you, and I like to, when we interview people to work for us, we always, what's your greatest accomplishment? What's your greatest weakness? And to me, I don't care so much as what's your greatest accomplishment, but what did you learn from something that actually happened?
Absolutely.
And if somebody asked me that question, I could honestly say, up front, I don't know that we hired high enough talent for key roles, right? So you're like, as an entrepreneur, you're scraping by and you're trying to do this, and how do I admin, right? That was kind of the big piece, or accounting, we'll call it that. And planning, kind of lumping that as an entrepreneur, you sort of start like, that's one thing, right? And we hired an individual who was, great and tried really hard, but didn't have the road, time, I guess you would say, right?
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. It's not enough experience.
Yeah, not at all. But nothing. She's been great in certain positions. That wasn't the right role. And I look back, and we paid for a lot of those mistakes over and over again, whether it be inventory correctness or bombs being wrong and materials being off, and this customer account's wonky. And so I think for me, it's really hard to do, I think, on the front end, but you've got to make some key investments. And I think for me, also being afraid to, like, you're like, I started this, I should be at this position, or I should be at this dollar amount, or whatever. And it's trying to get your head around hiring better every time, and that then helps you kind of get to the next chunk. So that's been hard.
I think what I really like about what you said is man, not taking anything from some of the people who've come on to this podcast. They're all in South Texas, where it's really rad. They're great, right? They're really great. But often, I get the textbook answer, right? When I know that there's more there, right? But as it goes in this world of growing businesses, and whether you're trying to get money from a VC or a PE, or not so much the bank, but when there is a reason why they go and they want to know about your team.
Yep.
right?
100%.
There's a reason why you're not going to get PE money unless you got a full-time CFO.
Yep.
And that CFO has to be tried and true, right? There's reasons behind those things that we deal with when you're putting yourself under that pressure.
Well, I think the big deal too, so you talk about somebody's experience. So, and I think the thing about experience is, and I'm not, be honest with you, I think people in our team would probably laugh at me because I'm the worst in terms of process oriented. So we did the flipping group. My need for change is super high. My self-control is very low. My organization's very low. But it's trying to find those key pieces. So I realize in a business, you've kind of got to have visionaries and you've got to have integrators, and trying to make sure that and so I'm a visionary. But where that has hindered me is not being able to always see systems. And so if you can get somebody with some long in the tooth that it can set up systems, then you don't have to fix the problem once. Well, I think there were several years there where we fought the same problem over, and you go home, what keeps you up at night? You're like, I have done this. How many times have I put this one bill of material together, and I'm still cost of goods is wrong, or margins are still off? What in the world? And you say it's circular until, I think for maturity, for me, that's been the big piece over the last 2 to 3 years is understanding, hey, these areas I'm weak in, but somebody else is stronger. I know it needs a system, so let's get a system put in place, and then I can play within the rules. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So, we have they get tired of me saying it around here. I have a little diagram that I draw, and in the diagram, the vertical line is vision versus resources, and on the other side is objectives versus the development of, right, processes. And I'm always saying, which line are we on right now before we have this conversation? Because I'm the vertical one, and I have to really move that mind shift to the horizontal, where because the horizontal is your transactional, and the vertical is your transformational. But it's funny we say that, and I know that it's in a ton of self-help business books. But the truth is, if you can identify that as your strength or your weakness, and then you put the people around you that can help you through that, because we know there's people that live by process. I'm married to one. It's all process, right?
And that's it. And that's what keeps me grounded. And like Absolutely. I said, my brother-in-law who runs Casper Companies and is kind of in charge of everything, he's that person. So we have a really good there's always rub there, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, when you start to understand the lanes, and I think for me, there's a hard transition there over the last, coming out of COVID, kind of went through some, business mentorship stuff, and it's like, hey, I need to get out of my own way. I think I went to a deal, and entrepreneurs, I think a lot of times you see this arc with companies and where they fail and why they fail.
Right.
And a lot of
Bell
it
curve
is
of diminishing return.
You end up being
More
the person that's in the way. And that I took away from that. I was like, I do not want to be the person in the way. And so we tried to bring in somebody else before bringing Jason in, and it was a miserable failure. I mean, it was very expensive. Went 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
Wasn't the right guy. We got each other in certain ways, but didn't pull certain weights. And so I can't remember what the name of the book is, but that visionary integrator thing was really kind of changing to me. And I realized that guy was not the right integrator for my vision, right? And so anyway,
it's a truth though. I mean, I think over time, just in conversation, I think over time we learn to do both. Just simply for lack of no other avenue. But especially if you're trying to scale, if you're trying to move fast, if you have the ability to work on the business instead of in the business, it does make a difference. It makes a big difference on how fast you can get there. And the world's moving so fast today.
Absolutely. Well, and that's interesting, and that's been a little bit of a different thing, going into like Casper Companies and Wrench Hand and stuff. That's been a little bit of a learning curve for a lot of people. I think the outdoor space is quick, right? So if you release a product, let's say if you release that product soft in August, which goes into the buy groups, and then it comes out, big launch and SHOT Show, you get 2 or 3 months of a wave, and then it peters out, and you got to have the next thing rolling in August, right? And so by the time you've come up with something, it's old again, and that's so hard, because when you look at doing bumper development, it's the 2015, the 22 now needs this bracket or this light switch, which it's just like the 20, and that was a different mentality. It's like, okay, we've got to pick it up quick. but it's super risky too, because if your systems aren't good and you blow into a whole bunch of product or blow in super fast, you have a whole bunch of quality issues or warranty issues. It's riskier.
Oh, it is.
Amounts.
Speaking of wrenching, I can remember back when I would buy a Ford F-350, and I would probably about every 3 years get a new one, and I would just switch my wrench hand from one to another, and I was able to do that for when they changed body styles. Man, I was mad because I had to go ahead. I was like, wait, the brackets aren't in the same place.
Yeah. Well, dude, I tell you what, side tangent, those things work. My wife was actually driving down 21, and she never drives my truck, and she was going down 21 south, and a car coming the other direction lost its entire tire. Jumped the median and smacked the truck, and it knocked my fog light out, and it slightly bent the bottom bar on the wrench hand. And so I'm like, dang it, that was the last one I got to buy with the family discount. So I call them and I'm like, how much is the bumper now? Oh my goodness,
$100.
Yeah. It's like, but based on insurance claim, they're like, hey, these are the things that could have messed up, but did.
Right.
It's so it.
I swear by them.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I swear by them altogether. They have been,
So it's a fun. That was tricky too. You're talking about marketing. That company, you really want to market as an insurance company. It is hard not to go there as a marketer. But like legal and all the stuff tied into that, you can't. Like there's so many things on the insurance side that you just cannot touch. But ultimately, if you could get in there, like I said, marketing minded and say, this is the best insurance policy you can possibly have, you could crush it. But
instead of just tapping bump gates, right?
Yep.
That's that. There's more to it. There's a reason. I'm sure, but there's a reason why every truck, or used to, in the oil field had it before you couldn't find white trucks anymore.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me, what's been the luckiest thing you did?
Luckiest thing. Man, that's
And I kind of define luck as just perfect timing with perfect training, right?
It's man. So the thing about it, and it's always hard to talk about yourself, right? The thing I'm good at, I love relationship development. So I'm reading a book now with Carnegie, which is How to Make Friends and Influence People.
Sure.
And I start realizing, like, man, some of the stuff I've done naturally over time. Like I really like going into a conversation, and I would like to know more about you than me talk about me, right?
I'm always the same way.
And
humility, I call it.
Yeah, and so you just learn a ton, right? And so we've had some really, really good relationships come out of that. So luckiest, we caught on, I think, with like we're talking about making product for Kimber, or through a connection we made with a rep group 10 years ago, we ended up with a big distributor contract. And so I think really, I don't know that I can say one key moment, but there's been several little moments looking back of like nuggets. Like, one thing I won't talk about yet. We'll talk about it off camera. We've got something big coming for August that is probably.
We love cliffhangers, by the way. It's a great marketing technique.
So post August, we'll get back together and talk about this. But there is a specific relationship in the industry on. I'll say this correctly without getting me in trouble. Some caliber development that we've done that it took. If I go through the 10 years and I weave back and I say, man, I met this influential person at this show purposely. And then, from that meeting, this happened. Okay, then I took that information and met with this person and met with this person. And it's fun to look back and see that thread, which I think will lead us to probably one of the biggest product launches that we'll ever have for all of our outdoor brands.
That's great.
And people always ask me, like, man, you seem to really enjoy, trade shows. And how do you know so many people? Man, it's putting yourself in those positions, right? So it's like, I want to meet Jim Shockey, right? Make up a name. And Jim Shockey is going to be at the Dallas Safari Club show. Well, okay, he's sponsored by Loophole. Who do I know at Loophole that I can go hang out with so that when Jim shows up, they'll introduce me, right? And so I love in my brain seeing connections like that.
Right.
And so I think that's how I would answer that question. Is I think the luckiest moment's coming up, but it's been nuggets along the way that. I don't know, man. It's hard because you also look at, and depending on what people's views are, like just God's blessing in family or business, and we did kind of a 6 months of prayer for your business last year, and I think there's just always things that you look back, you get home, and you're like, whew, that was a close one. Or we had I'll be honest, this is the Deep Dark podcast, right? We had a warranty issue. There had some disagreements with the customer whether it was actually a real warranty, right? So here's your prints, here's this. we did this, you want this, like, where do we align? And, and we felt like we were in the right, and it was going to be a huge return. And so we said, hey, look, here's the deal. We're going to take this percentage back because you guys told us at this time this was good. This was all good, and we asked you specifically. And, so we stood our ground, which was risky, and they kind of went back and said, yeah, you're right. It was on us. So these 900 products, he's like, we actually went and checked them. They're all good. They all work. We're going to put them in line, no problem. But it was narrow avoidance of catastrophic issues.
That's a give and take, right? You have to have a good feel when you're going to do that and when it's going to go the other way.
But you got to have the relationships, because if we're working together and you don't trust it, I'm telling you, hey man, like we really genuinely approach it this way, and you genuinely ask for these things. How do we work out of this as a partnership? And I think that's key. I think so many people, we went to an entrepreneurship deal at A&M, heard somebody else speech or talk, and it was like, you don't want every customer. And that's really hard starting a business, to think, I got to have everybody. And it took me a long time to learn it was okay that some customers just aren't your customer.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge lesson.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a hard one to learn. And when we got done, and I was talking to one of the kids, and I was like, tell you right now, that's the nugget. But there's no way you're going to believe it until you do it one time, and and it'll fail, and you'll look back and be like, God, I could have avoided it.
Right.
But I've not met an entrepreneur yet that has been able to actually avoid that.
Well, that's because we're told early on that volume leads to revenue, right? And that's not necessarily the truth, because what happens is you may end up with revenue, but your margins shrink considerably because you have the wrong customer. And at the end, you're like, how is it that I worked so hard and made so little, even though that top line was, great? Yeah, that's a hard one.
You got to have the right mix.
You got to have the right mix. But, talking about, what you're doing when you're actually networking, we got a term around here for it.
Okay.
We call it farming.
Okay.
So it's not planting seeds. You're actually out there, and you're actually, you're pulling up all the good fruit from the ground. But yeah, we do farming, and then we also have another term that we say, and this goes into actually how we build marketing strategies, right? So we understand go to market and how that lurks, but the other thing that we really love to do is say woolly mammoth hunting.
Okay, right? Unpack that one for me.
So what that means is that I have a target that I know who I want to sell. This is my perfect client. I think they'd be a great client. How do I get in that door? Yeah. And then so I do the same thing, right? We're working our way through. But then if I'm doing it as a marketing strategy, there's digital ways that I can help a client get there where they don't have to have as much legwork going into it, right? And at the end, they go, hey, wow, how did they know to call me? Yep. Well, yeah, that's a little bit of the magic on the backside.
Oh, yeah, and there's so much of that out there. And, again, for us, it's always frustrating because I'm learning about that stuff all the time. And on the gun side, there's only certain things you can do, so you've got to be really strategic with how you get there. Right. But, some of the other companies, we were looking, a friend of mine who does some web development here in town, we were looking at our social, and he's like, show me your feed. Let's just see what your feed is. Oh, my feed's all firearm or hunting or rodeo or roping or whatever. Right. I'm like, show me your feed. Well, it's like tech stuff and comedians. I'm like, so if you don't think that you're getting fed or getting groomed information, but as a marketer or as a business owner, like, to not take advantage of that stuff, I mean, it's
a tool.
Yeah, you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage. Yeah. And you have to.
Right. As long as we stay within ethical boundaries, we know that it's working. But we also know that a lot of that on the backside is going to happen whether you want it to or not. Yeah, they're there.
And I'm starting to look at it now. I'm like, oh, well, instead of looking at it like, oh, well, this company fed me this, or if I'm a business, that, oh, I feel bad, like, pressuring or feeding somebody to see my business. I think now, for me, I find it a interesting way to find new products, right? So, if I'm fed this, I don't know, I saw a deal for, like, we're getting into rodeo, or not rodeo, but roping and stuff. I grew up with it. My boy wants to do it. And so it's like, I got fed on the way over here some new rope company I never heard of, specifically doing stuff for kids. And I'm thankful that they put that out there, because I would have never heard about their stuff and probably end up buying some of it. Yeah. So it's cool that you guys are doing that. So how many customers do you currently work with in that area?
Oh, our book right now has, over the last year, probably somewhere in the 80 mark, anywhere from
That's awesome.
$1 million to $50 million, $200
That's
million
awesome.
companies.
That's awesome.
But, this ebb and flow, they come and go, especially on the design side.
Yeah.
So if we're doing everything from branding to web to getting design done, well, they're going to come in, they're going to come out. They may move to marketing, they may not.
Yep. The branding's a big key part of that. That's the part I just love that part.
The
of
branding is a huge part, right? And you have to look right, you have to sound right.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. But on the other piece of that, marketing is technical, and it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. So people don't realize really what goes into it until they try to do it themselves and see no return.
Yep. What have you been seeing, if you don't mind me asking? I know this is a little off topic here, but what do you see on print media? I feel like I'm seeing a unique resurgence in some print media, at least in our space. And what's your opinion on that?
Traditional media. So it kind of depends upon if you're talking about go-to-market,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're talking, and this is a great thing to discuss. We know that there's yearly price points. So if one client is worth $2,000 a year, and that is their yearly ticket, we know that digital is going to work.
Yep.
It's about the $7,800 mark on that price ticket that, guess what? It probably is not going to work anymore.
Interesting.
And the other thing that we're realizing, the other thing that you see is the traditional means are getting to be more and more. People do not want to go. Let me give you an example. At $100,000 to go buy a new Ford F-350 that's not on the lot, that you have to go spec out yourself. Nobody wants to get online and try to go through that spec sheet online. They want you to hand them a piece of paper that they can see it, they can think about it, it's tangible, right? But we are going back in a lot of other things, right? I don't know if you saw this, but vinyl outsold all the other forms of media for music last year.
Which is
It's incredible to me that vinyl was number one. I still
Again, it's that whole coming back.
It's that whole coming back.
Which I wonder, from a marketing side, it would be, in this probably not the conversation to have here, but I wonder what that is in people, right? Because if you could ever tap into like what that desire is, you could really do something.
Well,
with that.
I try not to psychoanalyze people, because as a natural marketer and salesman, that's your tendency, right? What's this person thinking? I'm forecasting what they're about to say.
Right.
So you have to stay away from that. But I think that this current generation, and I know there's a whole lot into this, but man, if you think about it, their entire social life, before COVID and everything else, has just been topsy-turvy.
Yep.
There has been nothing substantial, right? There's nothing that's real. And so, and this came out in Fast Companies the other day that was saying Generation Z is just absolutely looking for some security. Right?
That's kind of what I was saying. It's an anchor, and you can go back to a generation and say, well, mom or dad or granddad was anchored in this product or this thing. Yeah.
But at the same time, I'll tell you that if you have a company that let's just say on the B2B, business to business side, more than likely the current generation is going to vet you over the net before they will talk to you.
Yeah.
Right, so so you find a company man, you find a manager, you find someone else, they're going to vet you there. So you better be digitally sound, right? You've got to look right, and all those aspects. Even if inbound marketing techniques aren't going to work, you're going to need to, because they're going to look for them.
Right.
But on the other side, you better be ready, because they're going to, once they figure out who you are and they're willing to have that conversation, then they want security.
Yep.
They want to believe that you're there for the long run.
Yep. No, totally agree.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's an interesting dynamic. I'm an Xer. Doesn't quite work that way with us, right? Literally the Wild West, what's going on in our head most of the time. So, you have to.
Good way to describe it.
You have to be ready for that.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so that's kind of where we're going. But we see ebbs and flows, but it does depend upon the product. It does. B2B and B2C are two total different ways of getting to them. And so, thought leadership is a big thing right now.
Unpack that for me a little bit.
So it's not enough that you have a great brand or you have a great product. You need to know and be able to tell them why it's a great brand. So so if you're in this area and you're trying to sell to a younger person, and for you at this point in time, you can't decide whether 6.5 is where you need to be, or 5.56, or how you're going to build, whatever it needs to be. Why is Creedmoor the greatest ever? Well, you need to be able to explain not just the manufacturing portion, but what that's going to happen at the range and how that's going to translate, right? You really need to know it, because they do want to know the details.
Yeah, we see that. One of the talking about caliber stuff, we see that a lot. Like 22 Creedmoor is a caliber that we created, and it's been a lot of time, effort, and energy pioneering, would be the best way to say it. And what we're seeing, we did a podcast with Hornady specifically on the 22 Creedmoor, and I was talking to Seth, who runs their podcast. A couple of interesting things. One, the outdoor male market tends to like their media on video even more than their audio. So, like, their podcast downloads on YouTube are exponential to
exponentially higher. If I want to reach the male demographic,
which
it's
is
YouTube.
crazy. Because we have these conversations with my wife, because she's in marketing too, and she's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And then, and then also you tend to see these male podcasts or male content go much longer. So, your Meat Eater podcast.
The Joe Rogan effect.
Yeah, which is like, Meat Eater, I was listening to one that's like 2.5 hours, which my wife's like, how on earth?
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Have you jumped into it? Have you really thought about it?
Personally, I think what I like is it's the community piece of it, right? So, like, I don't think, and this is a side tangent, I don't think guys do a really good job of figuring out how to create community. So I'm part of the local church here, and one of my missions, I told my wife, I will do this year, is figure out how to better men's ministry at the church, because guys aren't real good at that. But you look at podcasts, if there's a group that's already happening, and that group's familiar or friendly, I can be on the fringe and enjoy that, and not actually have to step in and be part of that. So I just think that's it's an interesting piece of it.
I have an opinion.
Okay, give me that.
I'm gonna give it to you. So there's a social media platform out there, and the guy that actually created it and owns it has a really great podcast. But the social media platform is Go Wild, and it's only hunting, fishing, and guns, right? That's it. And it's not fancy. Right?
I'm familiar with it.
Fancy people never use the word fancy, but it's not fancy. So you can tell where I'm coming from. But when you tune into a podcast, and if the name represents it, and you may know who listened to him before, or better yet, it's got a good descriptor on it. For the male audience, you're, lack of a better term, in a safe place. Because what can happen now is the conversation can happen without people looking at you any certain direction. Like this one in general, we're talking about guns. There's going to be a lot of people that don't like that. We had one the other day where we were talking about a Christian way of leading a business. A lot of people aren't going to like that.
Right.
But you know what? It's okay, because this is a place where open communication can happen. So
That's
you're traveling down the road, and day to day within your business, you have to be, to a certain extent, you have to watch that filter.
That's a good point.
So, but you don't when you're traveling down the road, and you can laugh at what they say, and you can go, oh yeah, I can get that. And you're actually talking back to them as you're going down the road, but it allows for that communication. So that's why it is a great way. It's one of the best ways, content creation, to get people to start to believe in your brand. So,
side tangent to that, that's closely related.
Sure.
It's funny. I've always described it as what we call the campfire effect. So, when we were at Bowtech was newer. We were the largest archery company in terms of shipment dollars at the time, but it wasn't as universally accepted as Matthews, right? And so I had a classmate of mine, so we shot archery here. I went to Bowtech, she went to Matthews, and it was always that kind of banter back and forth. And what we figured at Bowtech finally was if I went to deer camp and I bought a Matthews, I could walk into camp and the guys would be like, "Hey, what'd you get?" "Oh, I got a Matthews," and immediately they'd be like, "Oh, cool, you're part of the team." Like, I don't have to explain anything. So I'm in a safe place. We can go on. Nobody's going to ask me anything about it. And if I came in with a Bowtech, they would be like, well, "Why did you buy a Bowtech? Why not a Matthews? Why this? Why that?" And so we had to figure out a way to arm our customers to be able to give a really good why, but knowing that they were purposely choosing to be the outsider.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big part of it. That's why you start out correct in brand. Because in the brand, you can push it to be an elite brand, and then you don't get questioned when you get into the group, right? And that's why it's also important to be that thought leader, as we talked about, because then you can tell people why, and you have an audience.
That's awesome.
All these things kind of work together. Digital marketing will work great. Pay-per-click will work great at a certain price point. If I got a widget that's cheap, it's going to move it, right? But you start to get to those higher prices. People want to know more about it. And it doesn't really work that way anymore. Somebody's not going to drop a credit card on a $7,800 product.
Right.
that they
Right.
saw in a digital ad on Instagram.
Yep.
Right? It's just not going to move. You have a company that's creating, let's say, for example, software, right? They're not going to buy $1 million price tag.
Yep.
So even though those things have to be done just for vetting purposes, it's limited.
Well, it's funny. So I don't know if you're familiar. In the outdoor space, there's buy groups, and buy groups are in different. I mean, it's just a common terminology for basically a collection of dealers that then buy as a single unit, right? So you can be a dealer in the gun space, and that's typically one level. And then when you reach a certain amount of sales, you can join these buy groups. Well, these buy groups may have 300 members, and they come to me as a manufacturer and say, hey, we're going to be your biggest dealer. What do you mean? You're 300 different dealers. No, we're going to buy as one. We're going to pay as one. We're going to act as one. So you're going to give us a better price. And so anyway, it takes a bit to get into these buy group clubs, and these clubs function a little bit different. But this is year 3 for us, and it's funny. There's a company, Nighthawk Pistols. They're great. Mickey's great. Runs that company really smooth. And he told me the first year, he said, well, how'd it go? Yeah, I was really expecting more. And he told me, he said, look, it's going to take 3 years before they realize you don't have junk on your boots.
It's like starting a business all over again, man, about 3 years.
And so there's year 3 for us, and he was exactly right. So it's like you said, there's a trust element and a interesting security element. And like going back to the kind of Hornady podcast, people are digging for really, really information or some source of truth, right? So you look at the podcasts that they've done that have been really successful, very techy, BCs, bullets this, speeds that, and then people have self-researched. And so now I'm a self-research expert. You've got to convince me that I'm not an expert.
That's right.
And so it's interesting.
Going to play Stump the Chump.
Right.
And by the way, I have access to instant information over Google, which may or may not be right.
Right.
But and I asked ChatGPT, so don't worry. I know what I'm talking about at this point in time. So I don't care if you've been doing this your whole life. That's no, but but it's funny you say that. Here's the other big thing that is coming to fruition quickly is that even prior to COVID, the role of the BD role was not as prolific as it once been. It had been. People thought digitally they could probably reach as they needed to. It's an ebb and flow in economy. If the economy is doing well, the phone rings.
Yeah.
The other part of that is I'm a firm believer that when the sun's out, the phone rings. Right? There's some things to that.
Yeah.
But equipping the business developer, the salesperson, and I know those are two different things in a way.
In a way, yeah.
But doing that has become essential because those people that can build and keep relationships, they figured out, man, we should have never let them go.
Yep. Well, I can go back to kind of what we said at the very beginning with Stiller. It's crucial that that's not only equipped, but it's the right on brand with what you're trying to get done. So and there's some people that won't be right for you, and then there'll be people, like you said, that need to be part of your team regardless.
Right.
And I don't know. You come at it from the outdoor industry is this way or that way. And like with Casper companies, we've been able to see a pretty wide breadth. It's generally always the same, to some degree, right? It's like your industry is as much as you want. This may make people upset, but as much as you want to believe that your industry is special, it's not that different.
You're correct. Yeah.
So,
we all share the same problems. That's probably one of the emphasis on this podcast is that, wow, you mean they're selling widgets and I'm over here selling a service, but and yet we're dealing with the same problem?
Right.
Yeah. People are people, and organizations are very much like people. Yep. They have some commonalities to them.
Which I think, on the build it side, like you talk about culture, man, that is so key. And that's something we've tried real hard on the Horizon side. So you think about, hey, we're a custom company, and that has a certain kind of swagger, right? So when you grow that, how do you maintain this image or this swagger or whatever, and really nailing down the brand on the front end so that you can make some of those crucial decisions is tough.
It's tough, and you hit the nail on the head. Decisions. So I was, I don't know if I read it or heard it, but I've lived by it, which is there is no such thing as culture.
Yep.
I'll clear that up.
Okay.
So there is no such thing as culture. What it is truly is that you have built a team that is making micro and macro decisions second by second, day by day. And if those decisions that are made are for the positive, then you come up with what we call a positive culture. If they're to the negative, I don't care how much money you're making, at the end of the day, nobody wants to work there.
Yep.
So it's this whole uniformity of this team, and it's not groupthink. Are
Yep.
they making decisions in their lanes like they should be making decisions, and are they making it well? Well, at the end of the day, you start looking around and you go, man, this place has developed even visually to something I never thought it would be. But why is that?
Yep.
It's because we all made really good decisions.
What's funny,
Behaviors.
and what's funny you mentioned that, we were having a meeting yesterday, and Jason, our CEO, whatever, he had just spoke. I think it was TLU maybe, that one of the business schools invited him in, and he said afterwards a student stopped him and said, "Well, what is the most important thing in an employee?" And so we were talking about that, and he answered it in a way that I was like, man, that's a really way. And what he said was, it's problem solving. Mm-hmm. And so we always use the example, growing up, Dad would always, we grew up in a small farm, deal. And I remember you could be probably 12 years old. Dad would take us, we were in a different town. Here's the tractor. Here's a brown sack lunch. Here's a toolbox. No cell phone. So I will be back at X time. Right, and so when the tractor broke down, you kind of had two decisions, right? You were either sat there till he came picked you up at dark, or you learned how to fix it. And driving the tractor was a lot more fun than sitting there all day.
Right.
And so my brother and I, or both brothers and I, kind of developed a unique problem-solving mentality. And so it's like, how do you hire that? And then, like you said, and getting that problem-solving, that decision matrix to then influence your overall positive, negative culture,
right.
Is key, and it is hard to interview.
It is hard. For me, the big old fad out there right now is, hey, we need to give an assessment. We need to see how Joe is wired.
Yeah.
And I come back these days with companies, I'm like, I don't care how Joe is wired. I care how Joe behaves.
You know what the best thing we've done so far in the last year has been is there's a book called The Who. And I don't know if you're familiar with that one. And it talks about interviewing for the who and not the what. And essentially, so we take our interview process is pretty in depth at this point. We have a who interview, which looks at, we create a scorecard, right? Mm-hmm. And so the scorecard has internal language about the role. So like for Horizon, we have a swagger scale, right? So are you swagger or are you crusty, right? You got to have a certain
I
score.
I like that.
And so we learn about the who, going through the person, asking them questions, and there's a kind of a list of questions. And then we do a focused interview. We actually start at the first job you ever had, and we ask you the same 7 questions, and then we go to the next job you had. And so some of those interviews may be an hour and a half, 2
Wow, I'm about to say
that,
you get some.
But what we learned is that about an hour and a half in, there's not a human being that won't just finally get to the real. And so you're tired enough, you're like, I'm just going to have to answer this guy's questions.
You've worn them down.
And then you get
Should have been an interrogator.
Yeah. Then you get real meat of how that person's, whether or not they fit with what you're looking for. So I highly recommend.
Yeah.
When we started, I was like, this is ridiculous. But we've ground it out, probably, I guess, we've been doing that. Well, shoot, it's been about 16 months now.
Well, it's probably a lot better to look at than your gut feeling.
Yeah.
I've learned that my gut feeling these days is not exactly what it used to be.
Yeah.
So
I don't like to let people go. I'd rather make the right hire. I'm softy on that end.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. I hate it as well. I'll do everything possible to not have to.
So if you can not have to by hiring the right person, that makes it a lot easier.
That's right. Plus, your business is going to be far more profitable when you have an incredible team.
Yep, absolutely.
That's one of the great things about Fidelis is I can be prouder of them.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So tell me, what's your great hope coming up, man? What do you hope's going to happen here in the rest of not just this fiscal year, but your future? Yeah,
so that's a big question, right? So to me, looking at Casper companies, when you think about legacy, right? Mm-hmm. And so again, wife's family, that kind of whole deal. And so with Horizon and using our personal brand, legacy was always more important to me than near-term goals, right? And so it's funny.
You're singing my song.
Well, it's interesting because it's a different wiring. I was in a review or being reviewed for my annual review, and I guess my managers were like, how do we motivate you? Because it's this and this metrics. Checking those metrics didn't really do anything for you. And I'm like, yeah, because it's hard. I don't see the near term. I want to see. Okay, is it possible, not saying it needs to, but is it possible that my sons could run this in some future or grandkids? Yeah. So it's I think that's where the drive is. And so it's trying to make decisions that do that, right? Mm-hmm. And so, again, talking a little bit about, we've got sort of this new launch, I'm going to say, with some I guess I talk about the launch, but the partnerships I can't really talk about, but, the 22 Creedmoor calibers, right? And so putting a ton of effort on that, and my vision for that is that is my ability to put my individual mark on the market, right? So
Awesome.
if I can pioneer a caliber that we're known for, that I can see that my grandkids can go into some version of virtual academy and 50, 100 years, whatever, and order this caliber and know that we had a hand in that is important to me. And so, in terms of we always call it what's on the horizon, it's really developing that, and then really I'm, focused on creating the culture around that. So the podcast, the content, the story arc, and then working on some unique ways to distribute our product that you see in other spaces but are not in the gun space currently, and which is its own challenges with how you transfer firearms in different state laws. And
absolutely.
And so, that's how I would answer that, is just trying to make decisions that have a longer term effect.
This leads into a much bigger conversation, longer and deep. That's a great answer, and I love that answer. I'm going to tell you why. So, dealing with entrepreneurs and dealing with having to raise money and dealing with having to deal with banks and all the things that go in there. And a lot of people bootstrap, don't get me wrong, but eventually there's two sides of the coin. Either you're going to build to sell, or you're going to go legacy.
Yep.
You have to decide that early on.
Yep.
You really do. One of the things I think has been a big downfall in business lately is that building to sell. There's two ways to look at that.
Yep.
Number one is profit, right? Can I 10x, 3x, whatever it's going to be, 12x? The other side is, for some reason, we got caught in this weird loop where the value of your business was based upon your actual growth and your volume, but had nothing to do with your profitability.
Yep. I've seen it.
Right.
That's how Bowtech was, and we grew like crazy. But I'm talking to the owners that have it now, and they're like, we were trying to sell it again, or maybe they just did sell it again, and it was built on that principle, where Casper Company has always been no net debt, built out of growth, and and what we do when we look at a company, revenue per FTE, so revenue per full-time equivalent, is super important. So we can go into a place, and it's really interesting. Think about this. If you're looking at a business now, I highly recommend this. Anybody will tell you or brag within some reason what their revenue is, right? Oh, what was your sales last year? Oh man, we did this, and this. Okay, so and then anybody will want to brag at how many employees they have. Oh man, I got 300 employees, and you divide that out, and your business, our business, we have a metrics of there's kind of a between this and this dollar amount works within our system. So if we can buy a company that has a revenue per FTE in this range, then we believe that we can put what we call our KBS, our Casper Business System. We can put our lean philosophy on that, and then eke out additional profit margins by combining and these kind of things. And so that's how we look at these companies. And then the way that we kind of picture in terms of the legacy piece with Casper Outdoors, which is Ratliff Traditions, was the Horizon part of that, and I was kind of confusing, but it's can you create sub-brands where that's your core never changes, but then these marketing brands or these spin-offs, you can buy, sell, trade.
There's synergies there, of course.
So you look at like a Vista, you look at a Faradyne, where these massive behemoth, the GSM, they may have 30 different brands, and then tomorrow they may have this one or that one. Is kind of where we see ourselves driving towards a miniature version of that, because it's really hard. That's in marketing. So you come up with a new product. Let's say tomorrow, this is one we've been talking about. We do a lot of carbon fiber composite stuff, and I like roping and rodeo. And so somebody said, well, why don't we make carbon fiber composite saddle trees? We could do that all day long. Make some cool stuff. Here's some neat designs. Okay, so say you can do that, and there's a market for that. What do you do with that? Do you put that, you can't really put that in Horizon Firearms. And so you've got to look at how do you now create another brand, rebrand, or, do private label.
Is there a memory, is there an association that allow people to know?
Yeah. And so for us, structuring your business to be able to create that, put the right to it, and then possibly sell that division seems to make the most sense, at least, what we're driving towards. So something different.
No, something different, but that is where you're at. So we did all that, and we've talked about most of these things today, and we've gone there. But if you were talking to your son, and I know you've already said a few things here about that, but if you're talking, do you have sons or sons?
I have two sons. I have a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Whew.
We're just getting
Have
running.
mercy. I've been there. Have mercy. So I don't know how you're still awake. What would you tell them? What was the lesson that you've learned about the path you've taken that they have to remember?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think it's the slogan in our family. So we would be, remember where you came from and know where you're going. And so I think that impacts a lot of things. So remember where you came from in terms of legacy, mistakes, the lessons learned, people who paved paths before you, right? And then know where you're going. So have a clear vision of what drives you, and then don't be afraid to chase it. Like and small example on that. So my oldest son right now, he's got a science project going on, right? And so the science project is basically to use he's a 4th grader, right? Use an electrical motor to turn on, or to use a switch and a battery pack to turn on something. Right.
That used to be like in high school for the rest of us. He's doing 4th grade.
So he comes home and he brings a sheet of paper and it's got all, Dad, I need to buy these motors and this switch and this deal. And I said, Ryder, what was the assignment? So yeah, okay, the assignment is this. Okay. What are other people in class doing? He said, Dad, they're doing boring stuff like turning on a light switch. I'm like, okay, so what are we trying to do? He's like, I want to do a drawbridge and I want to move this boat across it, and this is how I have. And I said, are you going to have enough time to do this? And he says, Dad, I got 3 weeks. This is easy stuff. And I'm like, okay. So, at that point, I'm like, man, as a parent, I've got 2 options, right? You either reel this back and you squash this thing and say, hey, okay, the assignment's only this. You only really need to do this. Or I can promote this vision. And what happens? Maybe he gets it done and he gets a good grade, whatever, and he learns something. Maybe he doesn't. Right. And so told him, I said, what are you personally willing to spend? He said, I'm going to do $20. Okay, great. So we bought these motors and these battery packs. And I said, look, here's the deal. I'm going to spot you so that you learn on how you run these motors. So I'll pitch in $11 and we'll buy you variable speed controls. So now it's learning and keeping that vision and driving towards something that it's different, within some walls of if he fails, what's the worst that can happen? If you succeed, now we've learned how to do this thing and check it off. So that's kind of my wife always, I think she enjoys it, but she always is like, man, you drive me crazy, in the sense that for me, it's always have to have something new and what's going on. But I'm really driven by long term. The explosions and stuff around me don't seem to bother me as much. So that's just the way we're trying to live. And so I would answer it as that way. Know where you came from and know where you're going.
Well, that's important, because a lot of people today are just trying to emulate somebody who's already been successful, and they don't have their own identity, which brings on problems later in life. So that's great advice.
Yep, I appreciate it, man.
We'll take it, man, for sure.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed
It's fun.
it. It's been good to get to know you, and you've got an awesome place here, and look forward to knowing more about it.
We're really proud of this team and what we've accomplished, man. It's as you know, well, I don't know if you know this, we started in a garage.
Ah, that's awesome.
And so from a garage to what
we
you
share
see today,
that. I love it.
Having a big building that's looking at Kyle Field across the street,
that's
and
awesome.
being able to tailgate football, that's pretty good.
Yep.
We're
so
there, man. We've arrived.
You wake up in the morning, you got to pinch yourself, right?
There you go.
So,
it's a great view.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.